I will first debrief my experience being a part of a program that for the ELCA. It was really a joint program between ELCA Young Adults, LIRS, and Border Servant Corps, which you'll learn a little bit more about towards the end of my debrief, and maybe Giovanna could talk a little bit about that. And I also have for us today, the second part of our presentation will be by Giovanna Oaxaca. She works as the program director for migration policy for Amparo. She's here. We became good friends on this immersion trip, and so I invited her to speak to you a bit about what's the current state of immigration policy today since the end of Title 42. And so to begin our first part, I have a small slideshow. So let me just switch here. Go. So this was called the Border Servant Corps Immersion Program, the Young Adults Border Immersion. We spent 4 days in Las Cruces, New Mexico and El Paso, learning a bit more about how different NGOs, churches, how the El Paso sector of Customs and Border Patrol handles the question of immigration on the U.S.-Mexico border. We stayed at this wonderful little house called Damon's House. It is really the kind of retreat place for Border Servant Corps. Border Servant Corps is an NGO that is a recognized ministry of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. It started as really an initiative from Peace Lutheran Church in Las Cruces, New Mexico. They were trying to figure out ways, how can we allow for migrants to stay overnight? What kind of resources can we provide for them temporarily as they move along through the process to move to their sponsor family? And so that's where Border Servant Corps kind of developed about 2018. Within the span of 5 years, they moved out of Peace Lutheran Church and bought this massive facility. I'll show you photos of it, that has a full kitchen, has full nursing staff. They have 4 or 5 basically kind of like caseworkers on site. They have this massive repository of clothing, of food, and really overnight stays up to maybe 2 or 3 days. And so all of this with the purpose of receiving migrants that have been vetted by Customs and Border Patrol as they spend maybe 1 or 2 nights in Las Cruces, and then they go off to their sponsor family, pending that they have a sponsor family that has a flight available for them to get to their destination. And so we were asked as a part of this program to really focus on 4 questions. Whose story are you hearing? How does a speaker's perspective shape what we think is true? How does this truth shape the laws we create? What impact do these laws and this truth ultimately have on people's lives? And this entire process was, as you can see here, these 4 days, we really spent 3 heavy days starting on Thursday, then Friday and Saturday, going at different aspects of the border. So on Thursday, we really got to meet a lot of the NGOs that were working on the ground in El Paso, and then we got a tour later on in Las Cruces of the Border Servant Corps Hospitality Center that I've been describing for you. On Friday, we got to meet with Border Patrol agents. We had the opportunity of meeting with a representative of the ACLU of New Mexico, who really wanted us to understand a bit more about what is the role of detention centers in this sector of the border, the El Paso sector. On Saturday, we focused more on border communities. How do border communities respond to immigration? What kind of resiliency do we see there? So we really had the wonderful blessing of doing 2 things. We went and did what's called a windshield survey. So we looked around various rural communities near Las Cruces, Anthony, Chaparral. I have a couple more, I'll say the names. We went around just seeing what basic resources are there. And then we had the opportunity of going and meeting with the executive director of the Women's Intercultural Center I'll speak a little bit more about her. She is an amazing person. She's received awards from the past 4 American presidents concerning the excellent work that she does there in the Women's Intercultural Center. And then finally, we left our time. We had a little reflection worship service on Thursday, and then we actually had church. We went to church at Peace Lutheran just to see. This is the community that kind of birthed Border Servant Corps. It's nice to see where their origins were. So let me show a couple of photos. So the first photo is of the main kind of NGO that really is the NGO that focuses on coordinating all of the migrants that have been released by Customs and Border Patrol that are going to stay overnight in El Paso. It's headed by a man named Mr. Ruben Garcia. He's been doing this for 45 years. So Annunciation House here, this is just an outside, there's certain things we couldn't take pictures of. And that's just an outside of the building. Right there, we got on Friday, you see there, we actually got right up to the border fence. This is right, you can see that land over there, that is Ciudad Juarez. So you have Ciudad Juarez here, and then right here is the Rio Grande. So we had this, it was just surreal, because I grew up on the border and I've never been that close to the border fence, and it's not a happy place. And then this is part of the artwork that the folks, the women at the Women's Intercultural Center developed. And maybe just a brief thing. So the Women's Intercultural Center, it is a community-based organization where every person that participates in this community is a stakeholder. And so they don't have any outside funding. All the funding comes from the folks within. And they managed to birth, I don't know how many businesses over the past 10 years. That every time someone comes in and they said, I have an idea for a business, this center focuses on empowering people to make those decisions, to figure out what does it take to make a business, and they get the ball rolling. It's phenomenal. Let's just say it's a lot of information that we got and inundated with from the program director, but it was a great time. So here's just like an overview that I just told you. So here's Thursday. This is also this is the kind of like the one of the storage centers at the hospitality center. Right here, there's a lot of the clothing, women's clothing, children's clothing, men's clothing. And this is Mika. She's one of the program directors there at Border Servant Corps. So we went to Annunciation House, Cafe Mayapan, which is this wonderful organization kind of empowering women of indigenous heritage to learn culinary arts and learn other kind of arts and be able to open their own businesses. And then there's this BCS Hospitality Center. On Friday, we not only met with the US Border Patrol agents and the ACLU, but we also met with a church that is currently a sanctuary congregation that really focuses on the undocumented. It is Iglesia Luterana Cristo Rey. They are in fellowship with us. This is their building. It's actually about maybe their entire like sanctuary space is about the size of this room, a little larger. But this is Pastor Juan de Dios. We know friends in common. I didn't realize that. And then here's Saturday. I told you the windshield survey. This is looking from the second floor of the Women's Intercultural Center down. You can see most of Anthony from here, Anthony, New Mexico. And we got to meet with the executive director of BSC, and I didn't take a photo of her, so that's the one thing I didn't do.
What is BSC?
Border Servant Corps. All right, so these are the reflection questions that I had mentioned earlier. All right, so the US immigration system, the first day we really wanted to focus on what is really the state of affairs on the border today. And Ruben Garcia here, we didn't show his face, he didn't want us to take a photo, but this is the sanctuary where we usually meet a lot of migrants in this particular area here. So this is an old converted Roman Catholic parish. Ruben said he meets a lot of individuals wanting to do immersion experiences, and he made this point about the border. He goes, border policy is not about the people on the border. It's about folks like you all. Border policy is shaped and crafted for the interior. So he said there's really two ways of understanding the US. There is the border and the interior. US immigration laws are really focused on the interior. They're not really focused on how to police the border. They're focused on who is moving into our border, who's moving into the interior, who's moving into the major cities, and who can stay here for as long as possible. And so he made that very clear. It was kind of shocking because most of us thought we'd go on the border, we're gonna learn about these poor people. Oh my God, what is the plight of these poor people? And he said, no, actually, you really have to think about the folks that are living next door where you're all from. And we were about a group of, I think, 20 people all throughout the continental US. And so some folks are kind of shocked. They're like, wow, that's interesting. An interesting way of viewing it. And then we had a wonderful tour of the BSC hospitality house. Here's one of their showers. This is fascinating. So on the outside, they got these like kind of like, you know, use those like storage units or those like shipping crates. And they converted it into these like wonderfully fully fledged like showers. Like this is, you don't see here, there's like 3 or 4 stalls. You have 2 showers in the back, you have all of this, and this is just the women's. They have a women's and a men's. And then over here, this is where they kind of prepare all their little kits that they give for folks. When migrants come in, they usually have these kind of like immigration kind of like jumpers, like the one-piece jumpers. And so to just give them a little more bit of dignity, there's some clothes that they have for the folks there. And then here's some more photos. This is kind of the outside of the Annunciation House, the neighborhood that it is. It's really close to Ciudad Juarez, so it's really not that far away. And here we took a vantage point, like on the second day, we decided, let's go see El Paso, Ciudad Juarez. And I think if this is the one with the X, there's usually, on this vantage point, you can see a small X over here. That red X marks Ciudad Juarez. So literally it's El Paso and Ciudad Juarez is literally right here. That's how close it is. That community is just basically one community. And then this is an image of Cafe Mayapan. It's really fascinating. They have a lot of traditional Oaxacan dishes. And it's because, again, a lot of the women that they empower to kind of learn the culinary arts, to get their own business, are women who are of indigenous descent. And they have this wonderful kind of fair trade store that they partner with indigenous communities. They have personal relationships with folks. And it's, again, to empower women to make their own clothing, to be able to have their own businesses, to be self-sustaining. So it's just fascinating to see. This was in the heart of El Paso. So here's a little more on the hospitality center. They get pallets like this almost every day. And there's this wonderful man, his name is Jorge. He's in charge of all of the kind of the inventory in the back. And so this is from all over the US, getting shoes, getting toothpaste, getting shampoo, all kinds of, there's all these tubs are marked with different kinds of like sizes of shoes, men's shoes, women's shoes. And in the back, for all the clothing that they receive and they get back, there's a washing machine center here. Fascinating. This used to be someone used to live here in the back. Used to have cats. So there's a bunch of cats that used to live here. And more of this here. And inside BSC, we couldn't actually take some of the photos of BSC for obvious reasons. There are a lot of migrants. We had to ask for permission, and I didn't have enough time to ask everyone for that permission. Yes.
Are they serving people that have been processed and released by Borders?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so BSC only deals with individuals that have been processed and released by the Customs and Border Patrol. If there's anyone that is unauthorized here or undocumented, they can't accept them. It's typically related to funding.
So these people, when they turn themselves into Border Patrol and get released, they get a document or something that says that they have been processed and that they are due to come back at a certain time, or what's kind of paperwork?
Yeah, it's exactly that, and I'll have Giovanna speak a little bit more on that. It's exactly that. It'll tell them where their case is, what court it is, and also if they already have a sponsor family, then that will at least inform the sponsor family what is their paperwork, how they've been released. Yes, and so they help a lot with when folks, so when Annunciation, so when Annunciation House gets the numbers of migrants that have been released, Annunciation House then determines from across Border Servant Corps and the other NGOs that can take families in, who gets a certain percentage of people. From there, then they, I don't know, I forget how many Border Servant Corps gets. So then Annunciation House helps send them over to Border Servant Corps in Las Cruces. And there is when they have the paperwork and they'll meet with casework, case managers. They have about 4 or 5, all kinds of languages. They have English, Spanish, Portuguese, even Turkish, Arabic. People that can translate for them to help them understand. You have your sponsor, where's your sponsor? Do you have the ticket? And basically, how long are you gonna be here for? This is not your final destination. This is not, you're not in custody, you're free. Welcome to this country. So these case managers help individuals understand what's the next steps for them. And in their own language specifically. So then on Friday, we met with Border Patrol agents. And that was fascinating to say the least. We heard one thing in the morning, heard something different from ACLU and the so not surprised. It was, surprisingly, it was an amiable discussion with border agents, but I'll say this because it's a bit of a difficult situation. Their perspective on migrants that are coming in, they say that they are in favor of the safety of migrants coming in through legal channels, and ensuring that the migrants that don't come in authorized ways are not put in harm's way. And so that's how they justify the policies that they currently have, the way that this border fence is kind of laid out in different selective parts of the El Paso region. A lot of it is because, at least in their limited perspective on the border, they have found that a lot of migrants, when they've either asked, have given money for a coyote, or they've asked other individuals to help them cross the border, they have found that a lot of those people are tied with criminal organizations on the border, specifically cartels. And so they have found, at least what they presented for us, they found that a lot of these individuals were being kind of trafficked. Either trafficked by, they paid an enormous amount of money to cross over, or they perpetually stay in the other side of the border paying off a debt that they'll never be able to pay. So that's kind of the reality of this, is migrants that come here have money, they usually pay someone, they're not realizing these individuals are part of a criminal organization with nefarious deeds. So then we went to Iglesia Lutheran Cristo Rey so we can see how, for example, the undocumented are taken care of. It is a fascinating small place. They just decided, let's just do this, and haphazardly went into it, and their shelter's still going on. I mean, the numbers are astounding. I don't have them with me. I'll have to share them with you via email, but it's astounding as to how many families have managed to meet. And coming out of the pandemic, as you know, the flow of migrants was almost virtually nil. They've managed to also take care of their local community, providing feeding and clothing for communities that are undocumented, but they're already here. So yes. And then finally, we met with Leonardo Castañeda. He was originally a reporter, and he decided to go into the ACLU of New Mexico because he decided this is a much more noble cause. He wanted to describe a lot more for a much more impactful organization, the real state of detention centers in our country. And so he described that there's about 3 detention centers in what we call the El Paso sector. So the El Paso sector encompasses several, I don't know how many miles to the west of El Paso, and then it goes all the way through New Mexico. And that's what we call the El Paso sector. The border is divided into several sectors. The Rio Grande sector is Rio Grande up through about several hundred miles from, or several miles from Del Rio or Eagle Pass, and then Eagle Pass up through where near El Paso, you have what's called the Del Rio sector of the border. And this is the El Paso sector of the border. It's named by the major ports of entry, except the valley is the valley because everyone comes through any part of the valley. And then here's a little bit more. This is when they first opened their shelter, the people, Juan de Dios, Pastor Juan de Dios started noticing people were praying here in this little cross. And he realized this is the sacred space for the migrants. So when migrants would come over having a really tough time, he would see them praying there, and then Pastor Juan de Dios would give them pastoral care to see what's going on. The horrendous stories that he heard, the horrendous experiences that men and women faced. He heard them all at this foot of this cross here. And here's the rest of his facilities. He's showing us where migrants stay. Here are the cots, some clothing they have there. It's a real awesome outfit, and that's supported by the Rocky Mountain Synod of the ELCA. So another one of our sister synods right next to us. And so this is kind of the final concluding part of my section in this is, so this is what I call the resiliency of the border. These are border communities. So we did a windshield survey. Here's Mika. She's showing us here the Women's Intercultural Center. And here we are, and all of us that went as folks that were in the immersion group, here we all are. Here's the director in front, May Carter, and I'm there in the back. And then right here at the end, that was our concluding worship, basically helping folks figure out what was your experience of the border? Where did you see Jesus? Where did you see Mary? How did you process being in this in-between place where you saw both beauty and horror, resiliency and hopelessness? And so here's the windshield canvas. This is me just taking a photo of the beautiful New Mexico passage. So we went to San Miguel, La Mesa, Vado, Chaparral, and Anthony. And here's this Women's Intercultural Center, fascinating. All of their resources they have for citizenship, for things relating to ESL, they make in-house. So this is all that they, so this is I think their citizenship books, they made them themselves, both in English and in Spanish. Very, very resourceful. And there's May Carter, her story is, I tried to write it down, it was too much. But suffice it to say, she didn't really want to be the executive director. She wasn't really thinking about it, but God found a way and she became the executive director. She's the kind of person that, she's like, I think Anthony needs some water, they need some milk, where are we gonna get it from? And all of a sudden, several minutes later, she gets a call, hey, you have a truck full of water here, and we don't know what to do, but we know that you have the Women's Intercultural Center, would you like some? She's that kind of we call it, she knows how to hustle very well. And there's the courtyard, the courtyard of the executive, for the executive director. That's one of the original houses that was kind of built when Anthony was kind of founded. So it's a little piece of history there. And yeah, that's the end of my experience, to say the least. I'm from the border, as you know, some of this stuff is fairly familiar to me. A lot of what was different was the way that places like the Women's Intercultural Center were able to empower individuals in that community to really be entrepreneurs. And you have people that are below, most of the people in Anthony are below poverty. Just being able to see how just a group of women banded together, they have no funding from either the state or the government or from really wealthy donors, they get it from the people. And this organization is just, from the Valley, we don't have that. And I was like, wow, I wish we had that in the Valley. Yes.
Those places you did the windshield survey, what kind of resources do they have, those rural places?
It's interesting, we found a lot of middle schools. There was a lot of middle schools, hardly any, obviously any super centers. It was as if the whole culture of these small towns were focused on the middle school, because the middle school had internet, the middle school they had a little playground, the middle school would offer classes. So the middle school was the way that things were kind of rotated, but it's also middle school, which means it indicates, right? After middle school, you don't really have to continue on. There's the environment there is we're in pecan country. So there's a lot of pecan farms that, they're now defunct, but there's a lot of pecan farms that were there. So you just go and work. Yeah,
Okay, so I thought you meant resources for serve migrants, but
no, this is resources for folks on the board.
yeah, I see.
Yeah,
And if undocumented people show up at the places like the border serving place, do they send them to Cristo Rey or what do they do?
I think, if I remember, that's kind of what they do, but they just can't accept them in the building. So yes. All right. Yes,
So what is your take home from this whole experience, if you summarize it looking forward?
Summarize it looking forward. I think resiliency requires that folks in the interior and folks on the border learn to build bridges together. For us to be able to address the questions and issues that come from immigration, we have to build bridges between our community and folks unlike us, between, you know, for New York City to El Paso, there has to be this bridge in order for us to build up kind of a way of life that we all want. Anyone who comes to this country, we want them to live. All right, with that being said, I'm gonna now hand it over to Giovanna. Giovanna, please.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Great. Can those in the room hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. I'm glad I can hear you as well because I have some group exercises I want to do. So hi again, my name is Giovanna Oaxaca. I'm the Program Director for Migration Policy for the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and I'm also a part of the Amparo strategy. For those of you that are not familiar with Amparo, Amparo stands for Accompanying Migrant Minors with Protection, Advocacy, Representation, and Opportunities. And so, as you know, or some of you may know, Amparo is a very sacred word. It means refuge. In Spanish, you know, the term Amparo was inspired from Psalm 46, Dios es nuestro amparo y fortaleza, or in English, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. I want you to keep this in mind as we move through a very technical and policy-heavy presentation, as I do my best to explain why it is that we have the kinds of challenges we have with immigration and what kind of opportunities this seeds for our communities. Amparo, of course, was a strategy that was adopted by the ELCA in 2016. It is a holistic, whole church commitment envisioned to accompany children and families today and in the future who are forced to flee their communities. So just as a reminder of where we're coming from today. The commitments of Amparo are very simple. They are to uphold and guarantee the basic human rights and safety of migrant children and their families, to address the root causes of migration and the treatment of migrants in transit, to work towards just and humane policies, and to engage as a church body with all of its companions, affiliates, and partners to respond to the migration situation as a whole context, and to advocate for migrant children and their families. It's a very ambitious commitment, I will say. Having joined the ELCA about 3 years ago, I've seen all the ways that the whole church body engages all aspects of Amparo, from our many welcoming congregations and sanctuary synods to the partners that we work with in Central America and South America to respond to the situation of migrants in their various contexts. Of course, you may know that there are welcoming congregations who do some kind of support or accompaniment with migrants. That maybe that looks like sponsoring an asylum seeker or a refugee. Maybe that looks like working with community-based organizations in your vicinity. I'll tell you more about that towards the end as we turn to what other congregations do. The part that concerns me and my work is advocacy. I reside in Washington, D.C., and I work with the ELCA Advocacy Office, or as it's known, the Witness in Society Office. And we're working for national and international public policy change based on the experience of Lutheran ministries, programs, and projects around the world. And yes, we do take direct input from the entire church through such things as social messages and statements. So those things are guiding our work continuously. They are always what we turn back to. And on migration questions, some of those documents include the social message on immigration or the social policy resolution towards just, wise, and compassionate immigration reform, and of course, other social policy resolutions that are passed. So I'm the one on the other end in reading them, taking guidance from them, and mobilizing people to take action with their elected representatives at the federal level. Within advocacy, I also want to draw your attention to what Amparo is committed to doing around advocacy. We meet with our regional partners, and by this I mean Synod companions and non-governmental organizations that are based in Central America and South America, to articulate our policy priorities. And some of this, just for reference, include things like honoring the international human rights principles and values on migration, working to respond to the root causes of forced internal displacement and migration based around community principles, addressing governance in the Northern Triangle of Central America, which comprises the countries of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And of course, very lastly, I'll just highlight that we all understand and recognize that people in mobility are truly bearers of hope. And I think that's a really important value to lift up as we talk about how difficult migration can be as a whole experience. Migration is the symptom of many factors. This root causes explanation, unfortunately, it's like an hour-long presentation, but I'll give you the crash course, the 1,000 level foot view here. But migration, as we know, is a symptom of multiple factors and causes such as crime and violence, extreme poverty and economic collapse, environmental degradation and loss of traditional lifestyles, and impunity and elite indifference. Though we often say that there is not one single dominant factor that leads to people fleeing their communities, but it's often a confluence of these factors. And we saw a particular exacerbation of vulnerability during the COVID-19 pandemic, triggered these protracted economic crises in countries like Honduras, which is facing hunger and famine, in countries such as Venezuela, which was already under tight sanctions and experiencing social collapse. All of these triggering events were made worse by the pandemic. We also saw increases in gender-based violence during the COVID-19 pandemic, with people, families living in tight quarters, not being able to access police and justice, the justice systems. So that was also made worse by the pandemic. And I just want to highlight that as we think about our own experience with migration, that what would it take for you currently where you live to experience the need to have to flee? Think about all of the factors that would have to go wrong for you to make that decision. Of course, migration is not always a bad thing. It's actually an adaptation strategy, and it can unlock a lot of opportunities for folks, not just to seek safety and protection, but to seek a new home if their country is underwater, for example, or experiencing environmental and ecological degradation. And this is very important to highlight as we see the consequences of the climate change around us every day. Now, I'll just highlight a few statistics here for you, that these factors are contributing to the number of forcibly displaced people increasing by quite a lot. So between 2021 and 2022, the year increase in numbers of people who have been forcibly displaced is higher than it's ever been. So it used to be around 89.4, I believe, forcibly displaced people in 2021. Now that number is 108.4 million. And the UNHCR, or the UN Refugee Agency, projects that that number will reach 110 million by the end of 2022. It's interesting to note the United States is the top recipient of new asylum applications. However, that doesn't mean it is the country that hosts the most asylum seekers or most refugees. Typically, most people are hosted by their neighboring countries, and in fact, about 70% of displaced people are hosted in developing countries, not like the United States, for example. The numbers of asylum applications in the US have been increasing year after year, but the highest numbers have been from people or citizens of Venezuela, Cuba, Honduras, Guatemala, and Haiti. And you'll see probably why in a minute. So just really quickly, who could tell me sort of what world event peaked around 2018? What do you suppose made this sharp increase in the number of displaced people?
Earthquake in Haiti.
That's a good guess, yes. Any other guesses? Okay, so I'm gonna think about that for a second. Now compare that increase to the increase seen between 2020 and 2022. Who could tell me what happened around 2022, 21 timeframe that might lead to a lot of people having to suddenly leave their homes?
The Ukraine.
COVID.
It was COVID.
I'm hearing COVID, hearing Ukraine. Okay, partly right. So the number of people did increase as a result of the conflict in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine. COVID actually stifled the number of people who were able to leave because so many countries instituted travel bans. If you remember, the United States did not allow people to its borders who were from countries with high COVID cases. And that was true across the world. There were like 91 countries with some kind of travel or entry bans. But yes, the number of people who were, let's say, displaced was really high as a result of the Ukraine conflict, but also Afghanistan. This was around the time when Kabul fell. Afghanistan went back to power to the Taliban. And we also saw a lot of just displacement of Venezuelans. I believe it's over 8 million Venezuelans are living outside of their country. And let's see, here we have 3.2 million people fled Venezuela and the Syrian Arab Republic in 2018. So Syrian refugee crisis and Ukraine, Afghanistan, Venezuela, as well as other nations. Just a bit of perspective worldwide. Unfortunately, resettlement of refugees and asylum seekers doesn't go so well because we have made it very difficult for people to attain sort of a status once they get here. You all heard about like refugee camps and that sort of thing, which are more prevalent in other parts of the world. We don't have refugee camps necessarily in the United States or in Mexico, but we do have a lot of asylum seekers. So we do have to focus a lot on US asylum policy, because what happens is the way to get to the United States if you're a person in need of what's called international protection is you can go through the US Refugee Admissions Program, or USRAP, but you may have to wait 4, 5, 10 years in a refugee camp in another country, in Africa, in Asia. Your chances of resettlement are low, and it's very tough. And if your life is in danger, that may not be an option for you. So a lot of people use the asylum route. Under asylum law in the United States, the Refugee Act of the 1980s, the United States is obliged not to return anyone to where they could face danger. And because we're subscribers of the Refugee Convention, the United States agrees that anybody who touches US soil may claim asylum. So in this way, you can think of seeking asylum as a human right. But various different administrations through time have adopted different approaches. Some have made it more difficult. Some have imposed pretty high costs to migrants and asylum seekers to make it really hard to get here. We kind of call that deterrence-based immigration policy. And here are some examples you may recall from the previous administration, but zero tolerance, which resulted in family separations, the Remain in Mexico policy or migration policy protection protocols, metering, there's this thing called PACER and HARP, and expedited asylum. All of these sort of just make it a little bit harder for people to come, or very, very hard, in order to deter them from using that pathway. One of the pathways, or one of the obstacles that people saw in the last year was Title 42. Everybody, I'm sure by now, has heard of Title 42, but it is a part of public health law that was first invoked during the Trump administration as a pandemic response. It was continued under the Biden administration and was only recently lifted on May 11th. The thing about Title 42 is it's not an immigration law. It's part of the public health like code or something. And it's only been revived a couple of separate times. In fact, it was CDC experts, Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, higher ups, who said there's no justification for this. You know, we allow tourists and people's who are traveling to the border to come across like nothing. Why are we only doing this for migrants and asylum seekers? So there was a little bit of dissonance there, like why only migrants and asylum seekers? But of course, we kind of know the reason why. I'll remind you that asylum is not easy. So once people actually get here, they have to win asylum. They have to prove a credible fear of return, or credible fear of persecution. And they have to prove that in immigration court, and that can take up to on average, 4.2 years. In fact, we know that there are 820,000 asylum cases pending in immigration court as of 2023. So before it was the case that people could come up to the border, ask for asylum, they would be processed, they would continue through their immigration proceedings in the United States. They would go to court. If they failed that, they would be subject to deportation. That's kind of the process that was before Title 42. But because of Title 42, people who approached the border could be immediately expelled. So we saw 2.6 million expulsions since it began in 2020, March of 2020. Gradually, authorities began using Title 8 again. Title 8 is a part of the US legal code that is referenced to the immigration law. And so gradually they began to use it more and more, but many people may continue to be expelled. And the thing about expulsion is it doesn't carry the same legal consequences as deportation. And I'll show you about that in just a second. So the other thing you need to know is that Mexico, all this time, has said it's totally fine to deport people or expel people who are not Mexican citizens to Mexico, which is quite odd, but that is a decision, an agreement that was reached between the two sovereign nations. So what you need to know about Title 8, unlike Title 42, under Title 8, individuals should be given an opportunity to express their fear of return to their home country or any other country where the US might try to deport you, like Mexico. But unlike Title 42, under Title 8, if an individual cannot establish eligibility for asylum, they can be deported, which carries a 5-year bar on returning to the US. And if an individual does attempt to return, they can be criminally prosecuted under illegal reentry. So what prevented a lot of people from trying to cross multiple times during Title 42? Not much. They could continue to try and try again. So this kind of increased the number of like crossings you would hear about. Under Title 8, because there are legal consequences and there is actually a right to seek asylum, you will see fewer people attempt to cross. And this is actually what we've seen. Now, really quickly, you need to know that People right now are being encouraged to use something called CBP-1. It's a scheduling app like you would use to schedule a doctor's appointment. CBP-1 appointments are only offered at certain points of entry. It provides you an opportunity to come at a certain date and time and say, I have an appointment, please let me through. They let you through, you continue processing. Now, I really want to try this, but I'm conscious of time. So all of you have a cell phone? Yes?
Well, we have no internet in the basement here.
Yeah, no, that's the only problem.
No internet in the basement?
Yeah, it's sometimes, but not everyone can get
Yeah.
internet.
Oh, excellent, even better, because that is my point. I want you to open YouTube. Okay, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to do this, starting now. Open YouTube or go to google.com and type in youtube.com, and you're going to search the song Home / Shirley Sky. All right, timer starts now.
What about, God,
Oh, sure.
it's on the screen. Oh.
Yeah, there's one. And. No,
I got it,
I found it.
I got it.
how many?
What do I want? Got
All
it.
right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Raise your hand if you were able to pull it up. Let's see, 1,
Oh, no.
2, 3, 4. Am I seeing 4 or so?
I think just 3.
3.
Just 3. Okay, and there's somebody online who said that they were able to do it. Okay, so what you experienced is what migrants have to experience every day when they're trying to schedule an appointment through an app, despite not having regular internet access. And if you're not technologically savvy, you're not able to get an appointment as easily. Additionally, the app is only available in certain languages such as Portuguese, Haitian Creole, Spanish, and English. If you don't understand any of those languages or you're illiterate, you may not be able to navigate it at all. If you're not able to get an appointment, so about 98% of the people here, you are not able to get an appointment to a port of entry and therefore make your case for asylum. The 3 people that did have a clear path to a port of entry. That is, if you can navigate life and the northern border by avoiding cartels, avoiding being exploited, have a place to stay, and if you can even get to your appointment in the first place. So the 3 of you who got one, thumbs up. The rest of you would not have gotten it. I wanted just to highlight that because it's really important that we think about how hard it is to navigate the rules that are in place. There's another big rule you need to know about, which is the circumvention of lawful pathways rule. Around May 11th, the Biden administration finalized a regulation that says that if you did not come to the border with a CBP-1 appointment, or if you did not come to the border and you have already been denied asylum in a third country, you are considered presumptively ineligible for asylum. Effectively, this means that you have to get an appointment in order to be considered eligible, or you have to have been denied asylum in another country en route to the United States. Unless you can prove that it was extremely difficult to use the app for you, or you have an exceptionally compelling circumstance, like an acute emergency in the family, or an imminent / extreme threat to life, or if you meet the legal definition of a victim of a severe form of trafficking. Also, if you are an unaccompanied child, you are exempt from the rule. Even if you're considered ineligible for asylum, you may still be able to qualify for protection under the Convention Against Torture or Withholding Statute, but you're going to need to pass a much higher bar to prove that same amount of protection is needed. And obviously, the administration has been challenged on this rule. Dozens and dozens, hundreds of people sent in comments opposing this rule because when it was done under the under the Trump administration, similar asylum transit bans were considered to violate the law. Now, really quickly, if you're a single adult, again, you can access an appointment through CBP-1. But if, let's say that you don't, you're one of the 98% of people in the room who were not able to get an appointment, you can still show up. But you have to show by criteria that is not clear to us, but clear to CBP-1, that scheduling was not possible to access due to language barrier, illiteracy, significant technological failure, or other ongoing serious obstacle. Or you can prove one of the exceptionally compelling circumstances that I named. Let's say that you do approach CBP-1 without an appointment. You may or may not receive an interview in CBP custody within 3 days. If you are found ineligible for asylum, so you can't prove an exceptionally compelling circumstance, you did not get denied asylum in another country, you did not use a CBP-1 appointment, you will be evaluated for what's called the reasonable fear of persecution. And if that's not passed, you will face deportation to your home country or Mexico. It could be Mexico if you're a national from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, or Venezuela, or Mexico. If you're a family unit, kind of similar process, you either use a CBP-1 appointment, but if you don't, similar circumstances, you couldn't use it, or you have an exceptionally compelling circumstance. The thing is, families are being treated slightly differently. Families may be released under what's called a family, oops, did I just eliminate my screen? Okay, great. Got too excited there. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, hold on, let me catch up to where I was. Okay, families are being, some families are being released under the new Family Expedited Removal Management Program called FIRM and enrolled in an alternative to detention program. What that means is a family unit comes up, they don't have an appointment, they're enrolled in FIRM. The head of household may get what's called an ankle monitor or some other kind of tracking device. And if they're headed to one of these cities, that's Newark, Baltimore, Chicago, or Washington, D.C., and I think one other was added in the last week, they are essentially under curfew. They will be required to check in with the asylum office and complete the sort of screening process within, I think, a time frame of 30 days. And if they don't, then they are placed into removal proceedings right away. So we've already seen people have to be enrolled in that process. So what is this actually leading to? We've already seen immediate effects. For one, we've seen a steep drop in the number of single adults who pass initial screenings. So of the 8,000 or so asylum seekers who were subject to the new rules, 88% had the policy limit their access to asylum and therefore had to pass that higher standard of screening. This is compared to the number of people who have received protection, have passed a credible fear screening or reasonable fear screening, to be very different from what was the historical average. So between 2014 and 2019, about 83% of people would sort of pass an initial screening. Between the time frame of May 12th and June 13th, we've only seen about 46% of people pass that initial screening. Okay, why might that be the case? Well, a credible fear interview in detention has to happen within 3 days or so. You have 24 hours to obtain legal counsel. And if you cannot get interpretation or the interpretation isn't working for you, that might lead to higher barriers for you to prove that credible fear. It's just really hard to obtain legal counsel. There aren't enough lawyers for every asylum seeker. And so that might be a big reason why, because people may not understand what their rights are and may not understand how to present their cases as best as they can. To recap, and I think I'm just about on time, what we've seen since May 11th, since the end of Title 42, we've seen increased agents and field staff at the border, more processing, more surveillance of border communities, more detention and removal capacity. We've seen the number of CBP-1 appointments increase, actually. So that used to be less than 1,000 per day. Now there are 1,250 per day, or approximately 38,750 per month. This is fairly good news because it means more people are going to ports of entry and getting the protection that they need. You still do think sometimes about the people that didn't get an appointment, right? But yes, good news, the number of appointments is increasing. The total number of encounters, that's when a CBP agent or another federal agent encounters a person between a port of entry, it decreased about 69%. So right before May 11th, it was around 10,000. That has dropped down to about 3,000 per day average encounters. That's an astronomical drop. This tells you that most people are trying to go through the ports of entry, are trying to access the new procedures that are in place for them. And you've seen as a result, fewer people trying to cross between ports of entry. The administration also announced new regional processing centers that will offer refugee resettlement screenings, labor pathways, so like a labor visa to the United States. They're offering them in Guatemala, Colombia, and Costa Rica at the moment for migrants that are in those countries at this moment. So they'll be able to get access to protection and other ways to come to the US, Canada, or Spain much sooner. I think it's a positive example of regional cooperation, but we still don't know how it's played out because it's so new. I mean, the regional processing centers were just announced. And yes, there has been increased funding and coordination with non-governmental organizations in the southern border and in the interior. This is good news as well, because it means that everyone's having an honest conversation about how to address these challenges in our communities. They're coordinating funding. It's less duplicative. There's more conversation. At the end of the day, you don't want to avoid the topic of migration altogether and leave people in the streets and people in communities confused about what's happening. You want to have an honest and open conversation about it and see where the points of coordination and building bridges, like Sergio said, can happen. Lastly, I will just leave you that if we do anything, I always think about what my faith calls me to do, what our faith is calling us to do, and that's to love our neighbor, accompany the vulnerable, and welcome the sojourner. I feel that it's just and right to treat vulnerable people like asylum seekers with dignity. Above all else, is just recognizing that the people who are coming here to seek a better life are people just like us, and in a very similar situation, I might do the same. I did include some technical policy asks if you guys have a moment to write letters to Congress. I heard you guys are good at writing letters, but there are some suggestions for what Congress could be doing, like continuing to fund humanitarian respite across the country, continue to support case management programs to help asylum seekers navigate their immigration court proceedings, access long-term housing, and obtain work authorization. And on the subject of work authorization, Congress should fund the agency that adjudicates these work permits to process the backlog and expand access to work authorization. There's a bipartisan bill right now called the Asylum Seeker Work Authorization Act, which would address many of these issues. And then finally, at the heart of it, if we don't want people to migrate for whatever reason, we need to give them a choice. People should have a choice about whether they want to migrate if they don't want to migrate, and how they return back to their countries if that's what they want. We need to continue to coordinate and fund regional efforts aimed at addressing the reasons people flee their homes and give them that choice above all else. Now, if you aren't subscribed to our action alerts, you can use this bit.ly link here. You can scan it. You can copy that into the web browser. You can sign up for action alerts. And like I said, you can continue to make a difference at the federal level by writing your lawmakers, calling their offices, raising awareness like Sergio did by participating in an immersion experience, or doing some other kind of public awareness. I'll leave this to you for later. And I would be wrong if I didn't include a blurb here about supporting Amparo as a welcoming congregations, considering to advocate, as we've talked about, volunteering, praying, and giving to ELCA Amparo so we can multiply the effects of the whole church around this issue. That's all I have. I apologize if I ran a little bit over, but turning it back to you, Pastor Sergio.
All right, any questions, thoughts?
I have a question.
Yes.
So can someone apply for asylum if they think they're gonna starve to death in their country?
No. Someone must prove a credible fear of persecution based on national origin, race, oh, I'm forgetting the other ones, but I can bring you the full definition, but somebody must prove a credible fear of persecution.
Okay, thank you.
Mary.
I have a question for you. A long time ago, means 60s and 70s, in California, we had many temporary worker programs because of the Great Harvest, which was very dependent on temporary workers, whom we always referred to as migrant workers. I don't think I ever thought about what happened on the other side of the border. I only heard stories about what happened once they were in California. And then I'm not sure what happened after that. We assumed that they took the happy bus home and that again, they were invited to return the following season. Has that program disappeared?
I believe you might be referencing the Braceros program. It was an initiative that led to many Mexican workers in particular to come to the United States. Some of them were able to adjust their status when President Reagan passed the Reagan immigration bill in the 1960s, but many of them did go back. And since then we have had new temporary visa programs, such as the H-2A and H-2B visa worker programs, which recruit people in their countries of origin, fly them out here. They're here for a season. They go back and kind of rinse and repeat. But there is no pathway for them to stay permanently in the United States, even if they've been doing that for many years.
Very brief anecdote. That's how my great aunt is now in California. She was actually in that program. Yeah, so in the family, we had a Bracero in the family. So my great aunt Eddie, she still lives in California.
My grandfather was also Braceros.
Any other concluding thoughts? Rebecca, please.
I'm just struck by I've been to all the forums this summer, but we've had 3 forums that have addressed this issue. John Bowles' book, Lest Innocent Blood Be Shed, Every Life is Precious. Carolyn Jacobs, Howard Thurman, Every Life is Precious. And now we have this. I mean, it's like we're beating our heads against the wall. What are we doing? We're hearing it, but we're not acting on it. We need to get busy.
Ron.
I just have a question. Why is it so difficult to do something reasonable through Congress? I mean, it seems like, well, I mean, it just seems like if people want to come here, I can understand we want, let's have them post a bond. let's have them post a bond, you know, if you're coming here, post a bond, we can figure out, we can take it out of their taxes, we can allow them to work here. We need people to come, people need to come here, they're spending huge amounts of money on coyotes to try and smuggle in here, let's take the money and welcome them. Oh, no, just a thought.
Do you want to take a stab at that question, Pastor Sergio?
You're talking from one of those letters, Ron.
That's a topic for a letter.
Okay.
We'll wrap this up. Let's thank our presenter, Giovanna. Thank you. Thank you, Gio. It's been wonderful getting to know you. And we're so glad you're here. I'm gonna go on vacation starting next weekend, starting this Saturday, so you won't see me. But please tune in to the rest of our summer programming.
Linda's up next week. So yeah.
So God bless you all. Have a wonderful Sunday and we'll see you in August. Bye, Gio.
You're with.
You're